There comes a silence that doesn't come from the world outside, but from the weight you've been carrying for years. It's not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes after you've screamed inside yourself for too long. It's the sound left behind when you've held everything together, even when everything inside was falling apart. It's not loud, it's heavy. A silence that settles deep in your chest and makes everything else feel distant. Even your own name starts to sound like someone else's. Because being strong isn't always a choice. Sometimes, it's survival. And when you've spent a lifetime surviving, the idea of resting feels like failure. You smiled when you wanted to cry. You comforted others while your soul bled in silence. You showed up, again and again, even when your presence felt like a ghost of who you once were. But silence has a way of demanding attention. It starts softly, like a whisper behind the noise. And then one day, it becomes the only thing you hear. Strength was never your dream. You didn't wake up one day wishing to be unbreakable. Life simply gave you no other option. So you adapted. You endured. You learned to hold back tears in the middle of conversations. You mastered the art of pretending, not because you wanted to be strong, but because the world around you couldn't hold your truth. And slowly, that strength became your mask. A role so rehearsed it started to feel like your identity. But masks are heavy when worn for years. And strength, when used as armor, becomes a prison. There were nights when your chest tightened with a pain you couldn't name. Mornings when your body moved but your spirit stayed behind in bed. You became efficient, responsible, admired, but also invisible, even to yourself. You didn't collapse, but you disappeared. There's a kind of exhaustion that no rest can heal. It's the fatigue of carrying unspoken burdens, of being the one who always listens, but is never truly heard. The one who shows up for everyone but has no one to collapse into. You've become the safe harbor in every storm, but no one ever asked if your boat was sinking. And so, when the world finally gives you a moment of silence, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like drowning. The quiet reveals the noise you've silenced within. Memories, regrets, needs that were buried to protect others. Parts of you that never stopped screaming, even when your voice did. You were taught to survive, not to feel, to endure, not to question, to suppress the ache in your chest with responsibilities and routines. And slowly what was once instinctive became invisible. Your desires became background noise. Your fears swallowed. Your soul postponed. And when someone asked, "How are you?" you smiled. Not because you were fine, but because breaking down would be too inconvenient, too messy, too much. You learned that silence keeps people comfortable, even if it costs you your truth. But that silence is not peace. It's pressure without release. It's a scream that learned to whisper, a storm that learned to dress itself as calm. And while the world calls you resilient, your soul only knows fatigue, not from action, but from hiding everything that aches. There is a difference between being strong and being numb, and sometimes we don't know which one we've become. When strength becomes silence and silence becomes routine, something essential is lost. You no longer ask for help, not because you don't need it, but because you've stopped believing it will come. You no longer cry, not because it doesn't hurt, but because the tears dried out where hope used to live. You smile, not because you're fine, but because it's easier than explaining a sadness you don't fully understand. And that's when life starts fading. Not in one great tragedy, but in 1,000 quiet surrenders. But silence is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of a different kind of truth. The kind you whisper to yourself when the world stops listening. The kind that says, you don't have to carry everything. You can stop pretending. You can fall and still be worthy of rising again. If this touched you and you feel the echo of that silence speaking, write in the comments, "I still feel time." Share this with someone who needs to remember it's not too late to give meaning to the time that remains. And if you want to keep breaking cycles of pain and finding purpose, subscribe now. I see beyond the veil of the silence that speaks.